So, I want to go into the topic of choices because this is something that I talk a lot about on the podcast. You've written and talked a lot about how our choices in diet and lifestyle can transform our lives. What I want to ask you is a little bit different twist to this. How do you think this connects to living a purpose driven, intentional life, which is a key theme of the podcast?
That's a great question. I attribute the impact that I've had, which to me is the primary indicator of success that I use. How many people am I impacting? Is that impact a positive one? What kinds of feedback do I get? And I attribute my success in that regard to the fact that I am aligned with my purpose. And it took me a couple of decades to figure out what my purpose was. And my purpose obviously is something that I discovered by way of real personal tragedy, which is sometimes what it takes. But I feel aligned in the sense that you have to do what you can't not do. And I couldn't just sit back idly when I saw the most important person in my life suffering with this kind of awful condition, America's most feared condition, and being given 15 minutes in each doctor's office, after which a doctor would scribble a few notes on a prescription pad for a drug that had minimal effect, no disease modifying treatment, no disease modifying impact, and then send us on our way, left to our own devices. And I realized at that point that I couldn't sit idly. I had to speak up. I had to stand up and learn all that I could, despite the fact that I didn't have a formal training in this regard. At that point, I was able to do an inventory of my skills as a storyteller, as a communicator. I wasn't an academic, but I realized that I had spent the past 6 years communicating delicate and important topics to a mass audience. And so that I knew that I was really good at thinking on the fly and on my feet and communicating responsibly because words are powerful. So when communicating topics such as health literacy, to be really intentional about your word choice, which is something that I was very adept at. I realized that I was good at what it was that I was doing and that I enjoyed what I was doing, despite the fact that this was all rooted in something that was very tragic for me. I knew, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, John, that I love nutrition and health and talking about this stuff. This is something that I would be interested in learning about had my mom not developed this condition. I mean, would probably be interested in learning about it from a different vantage point, more from a fitness standpoint. But all of these things had to align for me to realize that I was aligned with my purpose. After I had that realization and I just simply proceeded to do what felt most natural to me, things really started to accelerate in terms of my professional opportunities. And I think it's really important for people to understand that you don't need to apologize for achieving a degree of commercial success, which I'm very grateful that I've been able to. My first book, Genius Foods, was a bestseller, and then my subsequent books have all been bestsellers. But I wouldn't be able to dedicate the time in my life to learning the amount of time that I allocate to learning about this topic every single day, right? Not able to pay my rent, what it is that I'm doing. The fact that I have a commercially successful podcast, for example, I wouldn't be able to dedicate such a significant proportion of my life to learning about this topic and the rigor that I dedicate to investigating nutrition science as a non-academic had I not been able to, from early on, start to make money with what it is that I do. So you have to find a way to identify what your passions are, but it's not enough to just be passionate. You have to also identify what your purpose is. And my purpose obviously had something to do with storytelling and communication. I recognized that early on. But then you also have to be able to find a way to commercialize it in a way that is responsible and doesn't involve selling your soul and compromising your integrity and your values in doing so. Because money is, in a way, a form of energy. And because I'm able to keep a roof over my head, doing what it is that I do, not distracting myself with other things, It's made me better at what it is that I do. A lot of documentary filmmakers, for example, they have their one documentary passion project and they'll produce ads, they'll do marketing to pay their rent. I had the idea of doing this long form documentary about dementia prevention, which is not something that had ever been undertaken before. And rather than go and try to make films for hire for other people, I just continued to learn about this topic that I was filming during the day. But then I started writing about it and I started creating social media content about it. And then I started having broader conversations about it on my podcast, The Genius Life. And all of that sort of created this pie that at first wasn't very profitable, but there were signs that this might be profitable, which just further cemented the initiatives that I was taking to dedicate time to these various different arms of my business. And then ultimately it became something that allowed me to focus full time on health science communication. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I've been able to do that as a result. But yeah, it all comes back to purpose and passion and the fact that I wake up every single day excited to read new science, to read a new paper, to get better at understanding science and to get better at assessing scientific literature, which is something that it's a skill that you're always improving on. And I attribute it all to really getting to focus on this full time. And part of that has to do with recognizing my purpose and not just being focused on the passion side of things, but also the purpose and being able to do a self inventory of the things that I know that I'm capable of, knowing where I could use a little bit of help and so on and so forth.